Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to join you here this evening. When I was first selected as the Labour candidate in 1981, before that was vetoed by the National Executive Committee, I was 29 years old. I've just celebrated my 61st birthday, so half of my lifetime has gone since those days. Fern is absolutely right that there is a general consensus that the Bermondsey by-election was probably the lowest point in modern election campaigning in this country. With little doubt, I'd say it was the dirtiest, most violent election in Britain in the 20th century, and certainly the most homophobic election ever in British history. There's also a general consensus amongst most commentators that I was subjected to more sustained press and public vilification than any parliamentary candidate since the 19th century. So it was quite unique in several very important, significant ways. As has already been mentioned, it was, in addition, a pivotal moment in Labour Party history. I was a left-wing Labour candidate. I'd been selected as a result of a renovation and renewal within a previously corrupt and moribund party, where when people tried to join, they were told Labour was full up. We boosted the membership to 800 members in the space of just 12 months, an unprecedented level of membership since the 1950s. And I stood on policies that I still stand by today, and which now, of course, are the mainstream, although I was vilified at the time as an extremist for advocating them. You know, the idea of a national minimum wage, an idea proposed by a long predecessor, Dr. Alfred Salter, I think in his maiden speech in Parliament. Of course, that was introduced by the Tony Blair government in the late 1990s. But at the time, I was told this will bankrupt business and you are going to wreck the economy. I also proposed comprehensive equality laws to protect all citizens against discrimination on the grounds of race, gender, sexuality, age, disability, and so on. Again, I was told this would damage the economy, it would be divisive, it would not be practical, it was impossible. But of course, eventually in 2010, with the Equality Act, it finally became reality. And perhaps most controversially of all, I argued in favour of a negotiated political settlement to the war in Ireland. I argued there needed to be a peace agreement, a political settlement to end that war. And I was told I was an apologist for the IRA. Yet, less than 2 decades later, a British government negotiated precisely the settlement that I advocated in 1981, 82, and 83. The other big issue, I think, in the by-election was, of course, the whole question of the redevelopment of this constituency, in particular, the Riverside. Now, I was very clear in arguing that we must defend local working-class communities against the Tory set-up, the London Dock and Developments Corporation, and the big business interests who are vying to grab key properties, particularly on the river, for speculative office and luxury flat development. I was again told that this was nonsense. And I think Bob Manish called me a barefaced liar for suggesting that anything would ever happen. But I knew that this London Dock and Development Corporation was intent on reshaping this community at the expense of local people. And that was really the core and crux of much of the Bermondsey by-election and the months and years preceding. I gave evidence at the Hayes Wharf inquiry against the office developments there, which again completely ignored the interests of local people. No local houses, no local jobs, just big office space for big companies who bring in their own workforces and displace local people. It really is no coincidence that much of the venom against me in the media was by newspapers who had a vested interest in property developments along the riverside. Nigel Brokes, the chair of the London Dockland Development Corporation, was involved with Trafalgar House, who were a major company seeking to invest and speculate in the riverside. It's no accident that his newspapers were some of the most savage against myself and the local Labour Party. As I said, at the time I was called a scaremonger and a liar, but in fact, nearly all my predictions came true as working class people were squeezed out and priced out of their own local community. It's true that I became a symbol of the struggle between the left and right. This struggle was much bigger than me or this constituency, but the fact that we had got rid of the old guard, who had not only, I believe, and the evidence is there, behaved in an undemocratic way in which the Labour Party was run, but we introduced lots of new policies, rebuilding links with local trade unions, tenants associations, community associations. We did, in some senses, even succeed in persuading John O'Grady to introduce some progressive policies on housing, reduced price admission to council facilities for the unemployed, and so on. To me, my defeat wasn't just about me. It was a symbolic defeat for the left in general, and for the right of local parties to make their own choices and to have their own candidates. As you know, of course, in the end, the reselection process was rerun because the Bermondsey party refused to capitulate to the National Executive Committee and choose another candidate, and I was duly reselected. That was a very important battle to secure and maintain internal party democracy. Many of you will know that I've written much of my own account in the book Battle for Bermondsey, published in 1983 by Heretic Books. I was a bit of a naive author at that time. It was the first book I ever wrote. I'd probably do it much better, and there's lots of things that are not in there that I probably would include if I wrote it now. But I think it gives a flavour of what happened in those days. I've got to say that the experience of the by-election and the run-up to it, because of course I was selected initially in November 1981, and there was a 15-month period when I was fighting to be a candidate, and I was still throughout all this time campaigning locally. In that period, for me personally, it was like living through a low-level civil war. Because of the attacks upon me by the tabloid press and by political opponents, I was subjected to very sustained hate mail, death threats, and so on. On an almost daily basis, there were either fabricated or totally biased and misrepresented stories appearing in much of the red top media. There were 4 far-right candidates ranged against me in the by-election. Not just the National Front, but a couple of other splinter organisations, including the Lady Dowager Birdwood, of one of her far-right, I can't remember, what was the name of her party, Simon? Anyway. But four fascist candidates against me. In 1982, one morning, we all woke up, and all throughout the constituency, in 3-foot-high letters in white paint, were slogans such as, "Tatchell is queer," "Tatchell is a communist poof," "Tatchell is a nigger lover." Virtually every subway, hoarding, railway arch and bridge had these slogans painted on them. I received not dozens, but hundreds, at least 500 hate letters, including 30 direct threats to kill me or to firebomb my flat. When out canvassing, I was physically and violently attacked over 100 times. On the doorsteps, when canvassing, I was spat at, punched, kicked and abused. I was very afraid, I've got to say. I felt no shame in admitting, when I went out canvassing, I was terrified. But I kept going canvassing, and of course, kept getting attacked. But I also had support. It was not a universally negative picture. Not all the people of Bermondsey were ranged against me. There were many, many wonderful, loyal people who understood the campaign of hate and vilification and saw through it. And I'm eternally indebted to them for their support, encouragement, which sustained me through what was one of the darkest periods of my entire life. In all, in the run up to the by-election, there were 30 violent attacks upon my flat in Elephant Castle, where I still live to this day. There were 2 attempts by car drivers to run me down in the street, and a bullet was posted through my letterbox in the middle of the night. I had to board up my flat, board up all the doors and windows because of these attacks. Every night I went to bed in fear of attack. I had so many near misses and lucky escapes. If I hadn't swerved at the right moment, I would have been knocked down by those cars. If people throwing rocks and bricks at me had had a better aim or I hadn't ducked, I could have sustained very serious head injuries. As it was, I had some of my teeth chipped and cracked and plenty of split lips and other minor injuries. What is shocking is throughout this entire period, the police refused me protection. Even though I produced the evidence and it was well known what was happening, the police refused to provide any protection for me in the run-up to the by-election or even during the by-election itself.